They called him Mr. Cruel, masked and malevolent.
The faceless fiend who struck terror into the hearts of Victorian parents.
An unidentified kidnapper, a serial predator and child killer who chose Melbourne suburbs as his hunting ground in the late 1980s and early 90s.
He was the boogeyman in real time.
He entered protected homes, took young girls in front of their parents,
blindfolded, bound and gagged his victims,
assaulted and traumatised them, and left no forensic trace of his identity.
The big question was, who's next and when is it going to happen?
Police considered him as cunning as he was depraved.
Some describe him as a monster, and I think that's probably accurate.
He sparked the largest police investigation and manhunt this country had ever seen.
This is the moment when Melbourne held its breath.
But Mr. Cruel was never captured.
These predators just don't stop.
He's still out there amongst us.
Tonight, our experts bring world-first technology to the hunt for Mr. Cruel, mapping every clue, finding new connections, eerie coincidences. The extraordinary clues that the victim was able to give police helps in the mapping, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It's remarkable how observant at least two of the victims were.
We'll track the probable location of his secret lair.
When we look at serial predators, we have to look at them much like we would look at an animal.
But importantly, we believe you, the public, will be our most critical link.
They had two witnesses.
A breakthrough sighting. Is this the man?
He saw these boys, they saw him.
We map the movements of Mr. Cruel.
These little pieces, which might seem insignificant at first, become incredibly valuable when all the pieces of the puzzle start to come together.
Can you help us crack this case? Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Joining me tonight, Charlie Bazina, retired Detective Senior Sergeant who has investigated over 150 homicides and was handed the Mr. Cruel case. Tim Watson-Munro, criminal psychologist who profiled Mr. Cruel for police. In Melbourne, John Sylvester, veteran crime reporter and co-author of the acclaimed Underbelly series. And from Utah in the United States, Mike King, criminal profiler and former serial crime investigator who has helped track down some of the world's worst offenders using the same technology we'll employ tonight. Thank you all for joining me. Charlie, if I can start with you, this was such a massive case that you found yourself in the middle of.
Yeah, very much so. I was handed the investigation file, and normally you'd probably get half a dozen folders to look at. And I went into this 3 metre by 3 metre room, and floor to ceiling was all folders.
I think the size of the room reflects the trauma that was inflicted on Melbourne. I was a young father. I lived quite close to one of the victims. I had children in a similar age bracket, and I can say as clear as day still that parents back then were worried about going out at night. They were worried that their children may be stalked and that they may be victims because of the magnitude of what was going on.
John Sylvester, he was called Mr. Cruel for a reason.
And there are certain crimes around Australia which define a city involving children, and when they are seemingly taken in a random way, and particularly with Mr. Cruel because they were taken from within the family home.
Mr. Cruel inflicted terrible pain, assaulting his victims and traumatising their parents.
Investigators faced with an unprecedented foe.
He was the main suspect in at least 9 attacks in Melbourne in the late 1980s and early 90s.
A man whose intimate knowledge of forensic evidence put him a step ahead of his time.
But there are 4 involving the assault, kidnap and murder of young girls that police believe were undoubtedly the work of this depraved predator who has never been caught. He left few clues, but he left a trail of data. And that's what makes our investigation tonight so different. Using a world-first software system developed by global giant S03E04, we'll analyse everything that's known about Mr. Cruel and his crimes.
The challenge becomes, how do I sift through this massive amount of information and interrogate it in a way that I can more quickly get to the nuggets that might help me in the investigation?
With the help of US criminal profiler Mike King, we'll feed in every shred of evidence, every witness statement. Geographical locations, weather, sounds, aerial imagery, a host of seemingly unrelated facts searching for new connections in the evidence. Using this technology, we aim to complete a picture of these horrific crimes in the hope that someone, somewhere, might help us identify Mr. Cruel and call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. We will quite literally be mapping a murderer.
Everything is a dot on the map. It might be the location that a suspect lives, or the location where the victim lives, or the disposal site, or a piece of evidence, but everything is a point on the map.
With 40 years' experience as a senior law enforcement investigator, Mike King is also an expert in the technology we're using tonight. It's called GIS, a Geographic Information System.
And the power of true GIS is that we look at those points on the map and we don't just say there was a dot here and a dot there, but we say, what is the relationship, the significance between each of those? Because that's what really starts to bring questions to the surface. All of the stops.
Mike previously used GIS technology in the case of American serial killer Robert Benjamin Rhodes, known as the truck stop killer.
These colored points on the map are representative of times when he stopped for a layover.
Using data about his crimes, Mike King linked Rhodes to nearly 50 other murders, identifying missing persons and locations that also brought forward new witnesses. Of all the unsolved cases in Australian criminal history, Mr. Cruel is perhaps the one that could benefit most using GIS technology. It's the early hours of August the 22nd, 1987. At 4 o'clock on that cold winter's morning, a nightmare begins at a house in the Melbourne suburb of Lower Plenty. Mr. Cruel's first victim is an 11-year-old girl whose identity police have never revealed. Wearing a balaclava, armed with a knife and gun, he breaks in. The young girl is asleep, her parents in another room. Mr. Cruel ties and gags them with electrical tape and forces them into a wardrobe. He assaults the girl over the course of several hours, drowning out the sound with the radio. Seemingly in no rush, he even makes himself a snack in the kitchen. Then he bathes his victim, ensuring he leaves no forensic trace, and goes. John Sylvester, one of the extraordinary aspects of this case is that this man took the time to have something to eat in the family house.
It was all about control, taking ownership of the place. Obviously, he'd done his homework and he knew exactly what he was doing.
Oh, you're dealing with a psychopath? Psychopaths are notorious for having no anxiety. They have a very high threshold for anxiety, if they have any at all.
Well, Mike King, somebody who goes into a family home with the parents there and does what he does, that's a brave soul or a depraved soul.
Absolutely. The thing that's so intriguing about this case is the amount of organization and pre-planning that would have had to have gone into this, because this isn't an offender who just looked for an open window or a door that was unlocked. He removed glass, he snuck into a home, and then in a blitz-style attack, he assaults the parents and grabs control of them. And imagine the amount of organization and confidence it would take for someone to do that. We have to really think about the experience level of an offender like this.
From his first known crime, it was clear to investigators that Mr. Cruel was a meticulous planner and probably had his victim's home under close surveillance. How he did that undetected is a question our GIS technology will try to answer. This is a man who's done a lot of surveillance.
Absolutely. I mean, from a profiling perspective, we would look at the behavior of how he could be in that neighborhood and yet be invisible. And the only way that's possible is he has to look like he belongs there. The mapping can help us in so many ways as we look at the location. Why did that offender fit in the neighborhood? Was it because he dressed like people that lived there? Or was it because he happened to be a delivery person that no one would ever pay attention to?
And it's a question for our viewers. Does this area we've mapped bring back memories of a stranger? Coming up,
He's escalating.
Mr. Cruel strikes a second time. It's a new level. He's now taken the child away.
He's very clever. He understands forensic procedures.
But is he a match for our 21st century technology?
And the message that it sends to these predators is you can't stop looking over your shoulder.
That's next on Under Investigation. They call him Mr. Cruel.
Comes while you are sleeping until nothing's what it seems.
One of the most cunning predators Australia has ever seen.
Something wicked this way comes.
It's August 1987, and he has just invaded a family home in the Melbourne suburb of Lower Plenty, attacking an 11-year-old girl while her parents and brother are tied up.
Something wicked this way comes.
We're investigating Mr. Cruel using a cutting-edge software system called GIS that maps every piece of data about his crimes.
And the power of true GIS is that we look at those points on the map and we say, what is the significance between each of those?
It's a way of focusing all known detail about Mr. Cruel in the hope that someone watching tonight might recall a clue that could crack the case and alert the police. It's now 2 days after Christmas, December 27th, 1988. Mr. Cruel has waited over a year before striking again. This time, it's in the suburb of Ringwood. At around 5:30 in the morning, the parents are still sleeping in the family home, as is their 10-year-old daughter. Showing a chilling familiarity with their house, Mr. Cruel breaks in.
In this particular case, he actually pushes a key through a lock onto the newspaper and pulls the newspaper out. So he's gone there equipped, knowing full well how he's going to get in.
Masked in a balaclava with white stitching around the mouth and eyes, Mr. Cruel confronts the parents in their bedroom. He binds their hands with copper wire, gags and blindfolds them with electric tape. Then he takes their daughter. He drives his victim to an unknown location and assaults her over the next 18 hours. It's a new level, though. He's now taken the child away.
He's escalating. Starts off with fantasies. In the first case, he's broken into the house, he's demonstrated power. So the next fantasy is abduct the child, take the child. It's much safer, probably a safe house. That way, he's not going to be disturbed by anyone.
But where was that safe house in 1988? This is where our GIS mapping technology comes into play. During her ordeal, the young girl hears aircraft flying overhead. It's a detail that US criminal profiler Mike King believes is vital in the hunt for Mr. Cruel using the GIS map.
She starts talking about the fact that she can hear airplanes, the distance that she might have thought she traveled.
Remarkably, despite her trauma, the young girl was able to distinguish that what she heard were aircraft landing. That eliminates 2 nearby airports, leaving one option, Melbourne's Tullamarine. At the time of the abduction, there were only 2 incoming flight paths to Tullamarine Airport, which tracked from east to west. So, by adding layers to our map, we can narrow down the location of Mr. Cruel's safe house to the northeastern suburbs of Melbourne.
These little pieces of evidence, which might seem a little insignificant at first, become incredibly valuable when all the pieces of the puzzle start to come together.
And we're seeing, I think, the location of these 2 cases now, they're not too far apart, are they?
No, they're geographically tied up. They're very close.
It's remarkable how observant at least 2 of the victims were, and how, when they were debriefed by police, they were able to provide an amazing detail which was put together into the file.
The file we're now using to input our data. A suspicious house with a driveway on the left in Melbourne's northeast. The victim said its bathroom had a wall-mounted or pedestal basin. The shower had a glass sliding door with a separate bath. She also said Mr. Cruel's car sounded like an older model. If any detail revealed by our GIS map jogs your memory, please call Crime Stoppers immediately.
About midnight, a woman motorist spotted a child walking along Orchard Road, Bayswater.
After 18 hours, Mr. Cruel releases the young girl at a high school near the Bayswater electrical substation, a location of great significance as our investigation proceeds. It's 1 suburb from her home. She is wearing nothing but garbage bags. And again, Mr. Cruel has left no forensic evidence of his assault. It's a chilling warning to police that the predator they're dealing with is on the next level of cunning.
He's very clever. I suspect he's highly educated. He understands forensic procedures.
He was meticulous. He bathed his victim. He makes them clean their teeth.
Yeah, makes them wash a number of times, brush their teeth, takes their clothes, and in fact carries them. To me, that tells me he knows about contact trace evidence.
But 30 years later, our GIS mapping software is using trace evidence Mr. Cruel was unaware of.
You know, when we look at serial predators, we have to look at them much like we would look at an animal.
Coming up,
This is the moment when Melbourne held its breath.
Mr. Cruel strikes again.
Effectively, no family was safe.
The trail of a predator.
Why is he selecting the victims where he is?
Revealed by our technology.
He definitely knew the area.
Brings a new witness forward.
He was completely secluded. He wasn't expecting to be seen.
That's next on Under Investigation. A depraved predator who's been dubbed Mr. Cruel has attacked 2 young girls in their Melbourne suburban homes, abducting the second and subjecting her to an 18-hour assault before releasing her.
10-year-old was reunited with her family after a horrifying ordeal.
Our team of experts, including US criminal profiler Mike King, are using cutting-edge data mapping technology to re-examine these crimes and hopefully encourage a new witness to come forward. The extraordinary clues that the victim was able to give police helps in the mapping, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Using data fed into our GIS map, including aircraft flight paths heard by his second victim, we've established that Mr. Cruel's safe house is probably in Melbourne's northeast. Details that may be important to someone who lived here at the time. If at any point these clues jog your memory, please call Crime Stoppers. It's now Wednesday, July 3rd, 1990, 18 months since Mr. Cruel's last attack. A British couple about to return to the UK leave their house to attend a farewell party. They've left their 2 daughters, aged 15 and 13, at home. They live in an upmarket part of Canterbury in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. At around 11:30 p.m, the girls are woken by a masked intruder armed with a knife. Mr. Cruel ties up the older sister and tells the 13-year-old to get her school uniform. She attends the prestigious Presbyterian Ladies' College. He then abducts her and drives into the night. So, John Sylvester, this is the moment, is it?
This is the moment when Melbourne held its breath. By this stage, it was known it was a serial offender and that effectively no family was safe.
If Mr. Cruel takes his 3rd victim to the same safe house where he'd assaulted his 2nd 18 months before, our GIS technology puts him in this area of northeast Melbourne. While being held captive, the young girl also hears aircraft flying over, just as Mr. Cruel's previous victim had. But this time the data is more specific. 7 to 9 jet planes landing, all before 10 a.m. on that Wednesday morning.
We know that the wind direction was coming from the north, blowing in a southerly direction.
The prevailing wind would have helped carry the sound of aircraft towards the south.
That would result in the airplanes landing from the east. That way they're coming in a westerly direction.
Layering this data over the zone we previously identified, we can zero in on the possibility that Mr. Cruel's safe house was in this region on the southern edge of the flight path. He keeps her prisoner for 50 hours, assaulting her repeatedly over that time. 50 hours of holding a child is a long time.
I think that he needs more time to get the same amount of thrill or more thrill, and he's probably struggling internally. Will I let this one go? Will I not let her go?
You think he's actually thinking about whether I'll let her go?
I do.
Mike King, this is information obviously still feeding into the map. We've now got 3 cases. We can see the locations of where they all are, but what are you looking for now?
Well, I think we continue to look at the location and the fact that it's all within about a 20-minute drive time from each other. And in that area, the offender has to feel comfortable to be able to function. And, you know, when we look at serial predators, we have to look at them much like we would look at an animal. A lion, for instance, is going to hunt in an area as long as that lion can continue to find prey. From a geographic perspective, we just have to keep thinking, why is he comfortable in this area? Why is he selecting the victims where he is? And why is he disposing of them where he is?
That's a question for which our data mapping software may soon have an answer.
Still bound and blindfolded, she was bundled out of a car into the darkness of a quiet street, just kilometres from the family home.
After 2 days and nights in Mr. Cruel's lair, his 3rd victim's horror is over. He releases her in the early hours of the morning at an electricity substation about 10 minutes' drive from her house.
As police work to track down the kidnapper, they're checking similarities with a number of other unsolved abductions.
Our GIS data map now reveals an extraordinary pattern. Both abducted victims were released near electricity substations, Kew and Bayswater. And both victims lived near substations, Ringwood and East Camberwell.
And the thing that's so intriguing to me is it a serial location, a substation, or is it the fact that it's a place where he can have some solitude, have a lower risk of being seen by some passerby? Maybe it has some kind of emotional tie to his life.
Do we assume then, when you put it into a map and you can see exactly where he's striking and where he's leaving his victims, he's familiar with the territory?
Yep.
Yes.
So does he come from this area?
Exactly, and I think he does.
The eerie link between electrical substations and the locations of Mr. Cruel's crimes is a breakthrough for our GIS mapping. It suggests he may have had a connection to the electricity industry.
There's clearly something, I think, in these substations, taking up Mark's point, probably because they're isolated. They're not places that people are going to go necessarily.
Perhaps he was an electrical linesman or masquerading as one. A man who would not draw notice as an outsider and who could have conducted his extensive surveillance from electrical poles.
Pieces of evidence like this become so important. The location of these substations next to victims' homes. Will this help the public remember something that was important to them at the time?
They could be vital clues. And incredibly, already one person who was alerted to our investigation has come forward with stunning information.
He definitely knew the area. He didn't come across this by accident. He was known to the area.
In 1988, this woman was a friend and neighbour of Mr. Cruel's second victim, a 10-year-old girl from Ringwood. In a little-known fact, their homes backed onto a cleared right-of-way for high-tension electrical towers, where the brothers of our witness would occasionally play.
You don't go to that area by accident. It's a no-through road. The only people around there are the people who lived in that area. Only someone who knew those power lines and the access it had to the houses on the back fence, because you can see over the fence without anyone noticing what you're doing.
Approximately 6 weeks before her school friend was abducted, our witness says her brothers reported seeing a strange man using a video camera. He was filming the victim's house over the back fence near the electricity towers.
This man would have been around 30 to 35, a bit overweight. So he had a belly, round on the face, and his hair was like a medium brown, kind of long sides, but balding on the top.
This is a sketch of that man described by the brothers.
He was completely secluded. That's why he was shocked when he was discovered. He wasn't expecting to be seen. Like, I think with everything that he did after, trying to hide his identity, is because he's been seen, and he knew he'd been seen.
It's information that was reported to the police at the time, but apparently was not followed up. Now it adds to the possible connection Mr. Cruel may have had, or pretended to have had, with the electrical industry in Melbourne in the 1980s.
I thought he would have worked as electrical, something to do with the power lines, purely for the fact of just this place in itself. He'd have to know this area and know she was there as well.
Coming up,
He was the boogeyman in real time. I was worried the next one wouldn't come back.
Mr. Cruel's sinister crimes escalate.
She's seen him. He's lost control because now she's seen his face.
And our GIS technology uncovers another crucial connection.
There are absolute reasons why he selected the victims he did.
That's next on Under Investigation. Serial predator Mr. Cruel has just released his third victim, a 13-year-old girl, after abducting her from her home and assaulting her in his safe house over 2 days. He frees her near an electrical substation at Kew in inner Melbourne.
This person certainly is dangerous, and being dangerous, he's capable of any crime.
The house moves into the mystery.
We're tracking him from a distance of 30 years using cutting-edge data mapping technology. But Melbourne in 1990 feels like a city under siege. Veteran crime reporter John Sylvester was there.
At this stage, it certainly becomes the most important investigation the Victoria Police are conducting. They're working under extreme deadline pressure because they know that if they don't find this person, he's likely to strike again. He's escalating. He's taking a child for longer. he's creating more serious assaults.
I mean, even staying at home, which is your castle, wasn't safe, was it?
People were starting not to go out at night. They were locking their doors, locking their windows. We just developed that climate of fear where young kids just didn't know who to trust.
It's absolutely right what John's saying. I can recall with my children and their friends, it was the boogeyman in real time. Certainly after the third child was taken, we're dealing with a serial offender, and the big question was, who's next and when is it going to happen and what's going to happen?
And what concerns us is the likelihood of this offender will strike again and perhaps commit an offence worse than what he's already done.
Our GIS data mapping software reveals that so far, Mr. Cruel's victims have been in Melbourne's outer northeast. But we've established that his safe house, where he carries out his dreadful assaults, is further north. And this area has a tragic link to his next victim. It's now April the 13th, 1991, in the upper middle-class suburb of Templestowe in Melbourne. It's a chilly Saturday night, and 13-year-old Carmen Chan is babysitting her two sisters at home. Their house is a suburban fortress, protected by 2-metre-high fences and electric front gates. If there's one child in Melbourne who should have been safe on that autumn night, it's Carmen Chan. To this point, Mr. Cruel has released all his victims.
He was struggling in a way that the fantasies hadn't reached the point of perhaps having an assault against a child and then killing the child.
Criminal psychologist Tim Watson-Munro assisted the police task force hunting Mr. Cruel. You said he was struggling. What makes you think that?
He let the children go, and despite the horror of what he did, he treated them quite kindly in a way. You know, he called them Bozo, Missy. He tried to put them at ease, but there were vicious assaults going on at the same time. I was very worried that he needed more violence to get his thrills, and homicide was part of that script.
On that April night in 1991, Carmen Chan's parents, Phyllis and John, are working at one of the restaurants they own. They're just 10 minutes away. Carmen and her sisters are suddenly confronted by a knife-wielding man wearing a balaclava. He forces the two young sisters into a cupboard, then drags Carmen out by her hair. She will never be seen alive again. There's a lot of conjecture about whether or not this is the same man. Charlie, what do you say?
I think, having looked at it as I have, I've got no doubt that it is, because there's similarities there. The fact that, even though they didn't know each other, they both went to the Presbyterian Ladies College. There's a link there.
It's a link we can now add to our GIS map, that both Carmen and Mr. Cruel's third victim attended the Presbyterian Ladies College. And that school is across the road from an electrical substation. Our GIS map has already revealed an eerie pattern of substations associated with these attacks.
I think it's pre-planned, he's rehearsed it, he knows what he's doing.
Is your fear escalation at this point, when you heard this?
Absolutely. I was worried the next one wouldn't come back.
Please, release my daughter! Oh, my family, the baby love her. All the fans love her. Carmen.
The police investigation into Mr. Cruel is now supercharged. A task force called Operation Spectrum is set up, with dozens of detectives working the case. Nearly 11,000 leads will be investigated, around 27,000 suspects interviewed, and a reward of $100,000 is offered. But there's no sign of Carmen nor Mr. Cruel.
A human skull was found by a man walking his dogs in a paddock
Then, on April the 9th, 1992, almost exactly 1 year after her disappearance, Carmen's remains are found buried under landfill, near an electricity substation.
DNA tests and dental records had confirmed that the body found at Thomastown was Carmen's.
But some, like John Sylvester, remain unconvinced the killer was Mr. Cruel.
She was shot 3 times in the back of the head, which is generally considered to be execution style, gangland style. Certainly the investigators at the time that the body was found checked as much as they could around the world in pedophile cases and found no case where the victim was shot in that manner. They had victims who'd been shot once and they had victims who'd been smothered, but not shot in that way.
But former Victorian homicide detective Charlie Bazina believes there's a clear reason why Mr. Cruel was the killer. Unlike any of his previous victims, Carmen may have seen his face and been able to identify him.
It's an overkill. One bullet may have done it, but she's been shot 3 times. And I think, looking at the profile of Mr. Cruel, that his world has been destroyed. She's seen him. He's lost control because now she's seen his face, and in anger, he just shot her 3 times.
Mike King, what is your gut instinct about the 4th victim, Carmen Chan?
I see some things that are similar. The victim selection process, the age of this victim, the manner of breaking into the house, but I'm not sure that the aggressive dragging her by her hair out of the house, unless he's completely unraveling, fits that. I'm not sure that the execution fits it, even if he were to choose to murder this child. 3 times is a lot of bullets to shoot.
Carmen's remains were found near the Thomastown Terminal Station, which connects to the smaller substations near where Mr. Cruel's other victims lived or were dumped. And again, we hope our map linking these locations may ignite the memory of a potential witness.
There's a lot of coincidences there.
But you look at coincidences,
You do.
don't you?
They just don't happen. And that's why you look at the crime scenes, the locations, as Mike has put, it becomes quite significant in relation to tying it all in.
But I might say too, I don't really believe in coincidences to this level of intensity. It's a hell of a coincidence if it is a coincidence.
Mike, do you believe it's just a coincidence?
I do not believe in coincidences, no. There's reasons why he selected those locations to drop off those victims. There are absolute reasons why he selected the victims he did.
Coming up, Mr. Cruel vanishes without a trace.
These predators just don't stop.
There may be other unsolved cases that can now be linked to Mr. Cruel. 30 years on,
Other victims that would show us how he's continuing to escalate.
will his identity finally be revealed?
He's still out there amongst us.
That's next on Under Investigation. Mr. Cruel was the serial predator who terrorised Melbourne in the late 1980s and early 90s.
The abduction took place around 9 o'clock last night.
A masked man with a handgun and a knife
blindfolded, bound and gagged his victims.
The abduction and murder of 13-year-old Carmen Chan in 1991 marked the end of his terror.
Take my daughter home safe.
Mr. Cruel left terrible anguish, but no clues in his wake. It was as if Australia's most wanted predator had simply vanished. Our experts are divided on whether Mr. Cruel's crimes really ended with the killing of Carmen Chan.
She's seen him. He's lost control because now she's seen his face, and in anger, he just shot her 3 times.
If it is Mr. Cruel and he's committed this murder, it breaks the fantasy and he realises that he's gone too far.
There are a number of theories why Mr. Cruel seemingly disappeared. But Mike King believes if he is still alive somewhere, he is still hunting.
This is too drastic of a step for him to just simply stop. When you look at other serial predator cases, these predators just don't stop. Something stops them, whether it's incarceration or a serious health issue, or they're relocated to another place and they only stop in our records locally, or in death. I personally don't believe this offender could just turn the switch off. I believe that he probably continued to offend and that there were other victims, if they could ever be identified, that would show us how he's continuing to escalate.
There are other attacks that occurred before Mr. Krul's known victims, which police suspect him of. 5 victims of various ages who were attacked in Melbourne's southeast, suggesting it's possible Mr. Krul may have lived here prior to 1987. Our GIS mapping technology zeroes in on one very telling case that bears the same hallmarks as Mr. Krul's later crimes. A 14-year-old girl abducted in 1985 is taken to a house and assaulted by a man with a knife wearing a balaclava. She is then released near an electrical substation, just like 2 of his known victims. Remember, Carmen Chan's body was also found buried near a substation. And there may be other unsolved cases that can now be linked to Mr. Krul based on the patterns revealed by our data mapping. Charlie, do you believe Mr. Krul is still there and still to be found?
Yeah, I think it's, you never give up as an investigator. This case is solvable. He's still out there amongst us. It's making the awareness, and this is the value of a program such as this, of putting back out there, because we do rely so heavily on the community, because this guy lives somewhere.
I would encourage people who have a suspicion to come forward and share those suspicions with others. This is how these crimes are solved.
John Sylvester, do you think this is going to take a confession before we ever find out?
He may have confided to somebody, or somebody may well have the suspicions. What we've got is cold case investigations, both in sex crimes and homicides, where cases which look unsolvable are solved like that, simply because somebody comes forward. We know there is a Mr. Krul, and it is solvable.
And do you feel the same way, Mike King?
Oh, absolutely, but my hope lies in the fact that technology continues to get better. We learn new things and new ways of looking at things. GIS gives us this ability or mapping to start putting things on the map in a way that makes sense.
The true hope of this GIS technology we've used tonight is finding that most precious thing in any cold case.
Do you feel the silence?
A witness who has not yet come forward.
In the lonely hour.
And already we have one whose detailed statement has been given to police so as her report can be investigated. The abduction of her school friend and neighbour continues to traumatise our witness to this day.
They had 2 witnesses. He knows that. He saw these boys. They saw him. This is just traumatizing. This is brutal. This should never, ever have happened.
And we're hoping there may be others who have seen or heard something that could help identify Mr. Krul. Connecting tonight's clues. The airport landing zone where Mr. Krul's safe house may have been. The eerie links to electrical substations and the electricity industry could join the dots for someone watching tonight.
Not only does it cause us to reflect on things a little differently, it brings things to the surface that hopefully propel us forward and get us the answer to a question. And the message that it sends to these predators is you can't stop looking over your shoulder because they're coming.
And the night will come.
The case of Mr. Krul remains open. Not to have it resolved is an added torment to his victims and their families. A final appeal that if anybody has new information, please call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. And you can see a more detailed description of the man identified by our witness tonight by visiting our Facebook page. I want to thank you all very much for joining us tonight, and hopefully something will come from this, and I'd like to thank you too. I'm Liz Hayes. Good night. Next week, nuclear power.
Radiation containment.
After 3 Mile Island,
there has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union.
Chernobyl,
both reactors are overheating.
And Fukushima.
Teetering on the brink of a massive meltdown.
Can it ever be safe?
You can't count on such a fragile technology.
On the 11th anniversary of the Fukushima horror,
this is crazy the way we're trying to eliminate nuclear out of this conversation.
We ask, should Australia go nuclear?
How are we going to decarbonise, and how are we going to maintain the lifestyle that we want?
Are we going to kill people so we can turn our lights on?
The debate.
This is a consensus body of all the countries in the world.
Well, they're wrong.
Goes into meltdown.
We need to be looking at any technology that we possibly can that can get us to some kind of net zero future.
It's an evil industry.
That's next week on Under Investigation.